Dr. Kathryn Mannix is a physician and psychotherapist. She has spent her career working with people who have incurable advanced illnesses, working to increase people's quality of life as they think about all of the many ways in which we decide our own limitations. She also started the UK's and possibly the world's first cognitive behavioral therapy clinic exclusively for palliative care patients. And she is the author of books I absolutely love because they are moving and textured and gorgeous, like With the End in Mind and Listen. Kathryn, I am so grateful you are here.
I am so delighted to meet you. I've been listening to you. Your voice is in my head. And what I notice is the kindness in your voice. That's what I really like about listening to your podcast.
So when I think about death, we decided that this is the horrible and awful conversation, and that the most important thing is to not think about it for as long as possible. And that is the cultural memo that I received.
I'm not sure that not talking about dying is really working that well for us, is it? What do you think? As a strategy, how's it working?
Maybe the other theory I had was like, you should just leave this, like, don't think about it for as long as possible. And then, because I love professionals and I believe in professionals, just leave it to the professionals.
I think over the 20th century is that we gave dying to the professionals. And I think one of the things that I really reflect on is thinking about my grandmother. She'd been one of the women who looked after people who were so sick that they were probably dying at home until they either got better or died. And that's what women had done for centuries. And it is largely women's work, not exclusively, but largely. And she will have recognised the approach of death and the kind of repetitive things that you see from one death to another, and then the individual things that you see because it's this person, then that person, then another person. So by the time she was 23, she was completely familiar with what happens as we die. I was 23. I just spent 5 years at medical school. I knew nothing about dying. I just spent 5 years being taught how to stop people from dying.
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, so my very first morning as a doctor, a kind of test from on high, maybe. A nurse comes running down the old-fashioned Victorian ward, you know, with the rows of beds facing each other, shouting, get the doctor, Dr. Mannix, Dr. Mannix. And I, who had been a medical student a week before, I'm looking around to see where the doctor might be.
She seems great.
And then I realised, oh, yikes, that's me. And she says, Mr. So-and-so is in the bath and he doesn't look very well. So I get into the bathroom, by which time the nurses have managed to get the water out of the bath, but Mr. So-and-so is still in the bath and he's very wet and he's very dead. So I helped them to lift him out of the bath, wrapped him in towels, and we sat him on a wheelchair because we couldn't get a stretcher into the bathroom area. It wasn't designed that way. So we've got this dead man sitting on a chair, wrapped in towels, with an extra towel wrapped all the way around him and round the back of the chair so that he won't slip out of it. And his head popped forwards and his spectacles dropped off, so I put his spectacles in the pocket of my white coat. And we processed back along the ward, and when we came out of the bathroom, every set of curtains around every bed was closed. And I suddenly realised that death is a secret in hospital. All these men on this ward, they all knew each other. They woke up every morning and joked about the fact that they had woken up again this morning, and knew about each other's families and each other's woes. Everybody knew his name. And suddenly they weren't going to see him again, and they weren't going to be allowed to say goodbye, those kind of transient friendships in hospital.
Yeah.
So day one was my, how are you going to deal with dying then, Kath? And about a week later, I found his specs in my pocket.
We carry all these stories with us, don't we? I mean... And I can think of, so many things I've purposefully blocked out because I was scared, especially being in hospitals. I was like, anything I don't have to see, I didn't want to see. And that makes a lot of sense to me until I think of how all the things I don't see or don't talk about, the volume on them just gets louder and louder and louder.
But that's the thing, isn't it? That we put all the scary things in that place that's dark, and we keep the lid on so it is dark. And because there's no information in there, there's just fear and horror and superstition and whispers and bad stories. Every time we take a look in, oh, it's so horrible, and we slam the lid down again. And I think we can shine a light into the box, but the light is information. And that has to be reliable information. So how do you know what information is reliable? How do you get to there? I need to say, for the benefit of your listeners...
I was hoping you would, because some people hear palliative care and they think it just means one thing.
Okay, so palliative care is the science and art of managing symptoms. And there might be physical symptoms, they might be emotional symptoms, they might be existential distress. It might be that you're absolutely tickety-boo, but your family's falling apart around you and they need some support. Palliative care will kind of wrap you in an holistic care approach that can proceed right alongside the oncologists doing what they're doing or the respiratory specialists doing what they're doing. We're partners in your care pathway. But if your illness is the kind of illness that can't be cured, which generally it is, because the other way of getting rid of symptoms is getting rid of the illness, right? So generally we meet people not because they're dying, but with an illness from which probably they will die, and we're often still associated with their care at the end of their lives, and that's what gets us a bad rep.
Yeah.
Okay? But you're not obliged to die because you've seen the palliative care team.
Totally.
Yeah, and we quite like it when you don't.
In American culture, they have this obsession with everything is possible. Everything is possibilism takes up a lot of emotional, psychological, spiritual room. And everything is possible, of course, like comes up with, again, some pretty hard limits in the case of like advanced or difficult or complicated illnesses or problems of any kind. So I was trying to come up with a way to describe like a limitation there without saying the thing that especially Americans fear the most, which is, well, won't I then slip into some kind of despair or nihilism, or then nothing will have meaning. And it's funny that the opposite for a lot of people of everything is possible then became nothing is possible. And so I was trying to explain this place in between of like, so I really settled on language like, well, we're talking about limited agency. We can't do everything, but we can do some things. But the difficult thing is choosing them really carefully. So when I read you and I listen to you, I think, wow, palliative care is this really unbelievable art and the wisdom around learning how to make small decisions in the midst of complicated illnesses. Does that sound right to you?
I think that's really, really good, because actually the big situation, and I know you know this from firsthand, the big situation is so big that it boggles your mind and you can't choose which little thing to focus on, because even if we're going to make a journey of 1,000 miles, we can only do it one step at a time. And so there's something about choosing a direction. So I might talk to you about, is your priority at the moment to live for as long as possible, or to have the best possible quality of life, which might mean not having some of the more toxic treatments. So it's a kind of trade-off. Where do you sit with that trade-off? Because once we know the direction, then we can start to make the smaller decisions about where's your priority today, what are the treatment options right now, thinking about the treatment options themselves as experiments. How well will this work for you? How well will you get on with this?
Yeah.
If it takes away your pain, but you're one of these people whose brain is particularly sensitive to this drug, you might find that you're beautifully pain-free but asleep most of the time. That's rare, but it can happen. And of the people that happens to, some might say, this is absolutely unbearable. I need my brain back. I'd rather have some pain than be not present. And other people say, this is absolute bliss. All my pain has gone. And actually, sometimes when somebody's pain is gone, they just need to do a lot of sleeping to catch up with the exhaustion that they've had from a long period of pain. So palliative care is a series of little experiments where what we're saying is, this is what we can do, this is what we can offer, this is what you can try, and we'll keep an eye on you while you're trying it. We'll ask you how it is for you. We'll adjust it around you. So it isn't that there's one answer. It's that there's a variety of little possibilities.
I see. So you get some of your control back too.
Yeah, well, you're in charge. We are here at your service. And I think maybe medicine's forgetting that a little bit sometimes. This is you, you're the patient now, you're in the system. We'll wind the handle and off you go down the conveyor belt. And it can feel very like that, can't it? So to be able to say, no, hang on, stop. You can get off that conveyor belt.
Oh, that's
and
such a
have
big
think.
feeling. Even you saying that, that's such a big feeling. Because the times where people let you get off the train at the stop you want to get off. I don't know. Or even sometimes I find when people describe something really difficult, but they describe it really well. I find I all of a sudden get a lot of like, not control, but like I can get my hands around something that otherwise felt really scary.
I think that's shining the light of information, isn't it, into the box of scary stuff. Oh, okay, that thing that you're frightened of, let's just get that one out. We'll leave the rest in there.
Yeah.
Let's look at this one. Okay, so you're worried about
Yeah.
taking morphine. Tell me why you're worried about taking morphine. Let me understand what it is that frightens you. And then let me tell you what science, what medicine, and what our experience has to bring to that, which might help you to look at it more in the round than just that single fear that you've got. And that might help you to decide, not I'm desperate to start taking morphine, but I'm willing to give it a go and see what happens.
That reminds me of you have such a powerful story of a man who was so worried that as his disease progressed that he would choke. And he came to you. Well, would you tell me about that?
So this was a really interesting man that I was actually always a little bit frightened of. He was a school head teacher. I think I called him Eric in the book. Eric had developed motor neuron disease, ALS. And he was really, really afraid of the idea of losing control, as many people are, and of being a burden to his wife. And so he decided the best thing for him to do would be to find a way to kill himself that would look like an accident so she would still get the insurance money. So he had a variety of plans, and each time he had a plan, his illness stole another step over him. And he eventually realised that he just wasn't going to be able to manage it when the day he went out to drive his car into a bridge. He got into the car, he started the car, and he realised that his legs would no longer manage the foot levers in the car to let him start and drive away.
Oh.
And so he ended up living his illness instead of taking his life earlier on in his illness.
What a great phrase, living his illness. Just like walking the path.
And I don't say that he did it willingly, but the next thing was he decided, well, if I can't control when I'm going to die, then I'll control something else. I'm going to make sure the family gets the best Christmas that they've ever had. And then we were concerned that he wasn't actually going to live until Christmas. So this was going to be another loss of control. So the conversation we had was, what is it that's really important about this? And it turned out that it wasn't the date of the 25th of December. It was the family gathering of Christmas. So we just did Christmas in October instead. And in the hospice facility where I was working at the time, the kitchen staff turned one of our lecture rooms into a banqueting restaurant for him and his family.
Aww.
You know, silver service, white tablecloths, table decorations, Christmas tree in the corner, and all the family dressed up in their Christmas jumpers. You know, in October, they must be so hot. And they just had this wonderful end of his life Christmas party. And he sent for me after that. And you know, there's something I need to tell you, and you need to listen. So I was really, really angry with you, because when I first met him on a palliative care consult, he was so rude to me, because what was I going to do? Save his life? What have you got? Nothing. And gradually we became a team that was going to work around these difficulties, so that eventually he and his family pulled off this great Christmas, because he let the hospice team seed that idea to them all, you know? So
There's such intimacy in being known, even
absolutely.
in that. That's wild.
So what he wanted to say was, look, I was really cross with you because I thought that you wanted to just get in the way of me taking my own life, and that you didn't get it. But you weren't saying no to death. You were saying yes to life.
Mm.
And I get it now. And I'm really glad that I didn't die then, because I would have missed all of this. So even though he was so much less able by that stage of his illness, he was able to look back and see the things that had been things that he was glad had happened, and not just things that he regretted had happened.
Oh.
So, you know, when you were talking before about that space between everything and nothing, I often I'm thinking with people about what happens to hope.
Uh-huh.
We do everything is a hope that's pinned on cure.
Yes.
And do nothing is despair.
Yes.
But actually there's do what you can and let your hope evolve is somewhere in the middle of that continuum, isn't it? And so what do you hope for if you can't hope for cure? Well, you hope for a good remission. You hope for good quality of life, mobility for as long as possible, that your intimate relationships remain intact and loving, and that the people who matter most to you will be there for you. And gradually you begin to transfer your hopes from you without it being too difficult for them as my life comes to an end.
Yeah.
That they will grieve, but they won't only grieve, that they'll carry on living and loving and rejoicing in the time after I'm dead. So hope, if you only hope for cure, you can't do any of the other hoping. You can't do any of the other adjusting, and you can't have any of the conversations about what my wishes and blessings for you are for the life that you'll carry on living after I'm not in it anymore.
Yeah. We have this really beautiful community at Everything Happens, and people send us their stories, and there's just a lot of sadness and around to be honest, especially men feeling like they want to rush end of life decisions because they're scared, or they haven't ever talked about it. And I didn't, it's been very humbling to see how scared and ill-equipped everyone feels around that topic when they're not really sure. Like someone who never talked about anything now has to talk about like what they would have to let people into feeling helpless around their grandkids. Or but you are just like a treasure chest of stories of people who made these little fine adjustments and lived into something lovelier than maybe they could have picked for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's what we observe, that each person, as they do their living, they make their adjustments at the same time, and they end up in a place that they never would have predicted that they would have been in. And that's partly because they don't understand what the process their body is going to go through towards the end of life is going to be. There's a bodily process to dying. Your body knows how to die in the same way as there's a bodily process for giving birth, and your body knows how to give birth.
You have this really careful description of what the body does.
So we have bodily systems. We are animals. We're really, really clever animals, but we're just animals. And if you watch a guinea pig dying, or you watch a cat dying, or you watch a human being dying, what you see is that pattern of being unwell, losing energy, running out of energy, needing sleep to recharge energy. And we do that when we're trying to heal as well. So anybody who's ever been really sick with flu or something like that, you know, you get really tired. You know when it's real flu and not man flu, because you can't actually get out of bed. Yeah.
Is man flu, just to be clear, like man cold, where you suddenly see your husband with a very small illness while you have cancer, say like put a sweatshirt over his head and then go into a quiet place?
Because nobody understands how he's suffering.
It's really a difficult time for him.
Yeah, that would be the one.
Okay, just making sure that we have perfect cultural fluency here.
On the same page. So there's this physiological need for rest in order to attempt to recover. And I guess that's what the body's doing even during dying. It's attempting to recover, so it's taking the rest. And we're running out of energy, we're resting more, we're sleeping more. Again, for people who like their afternoon nap, This is not to sound alarm bells at all. I'm a big fan of the afternoon nap. This is a sleepiness where it's just irresistible. It's
Because you were saying if people want to take a nap, then that's how they would know that that's not the scary kind of sleeping.
Absolutely. If you're well enough to feel tired enough to want to take a nap, then you're well enough to wake up at the other end of it.
Yeah.
So it's really important that people understand that there's this process of gradually being overtaken by sleepiness to start off with, but later on by unconsciousness. And that's different because we notice when we're falling asleep, but we don't notice when we lapse into unconsciousness. So at the very, very end of our lives, people are usually unconscious all of the time. So what's happening now? Well, most of their brain is closing down. And a lot of their organs aren't working the same way as they did. So maybe their blood pressure isn't as strong as it was. So blood and oxygen aren't getting around the organs as well as they did. That's okay, because the body's not trying to move around and burn a lot of energy. It's just lying, being unconscious. So the only bits of the brain that are still really working at that point are hearing and breathing. So let's do hearing first, because that's really recent research, just before COVID. The University of BC in Vancouver
Thank you.
published a paper where they had collaborated with a local hospice service, and patients had really generously signed up to be part of their study, and they were wearing little sticky pads on their heads that were reading their brain waves. And the researchers played sounds to them while they were still awake and conscious when they were first agreeing to be part of the study, and they recorded what their brainwave response was to those specific sounds. So they weren't speech sounds, so that there wouldn't be any mix-up in the research.
Yeah.
And then as they did that journey down into unconsciousness, every now and again the researchers would play those noises in the room and just record the brainwaves. They didn't need to go into the room and get in the way of the family. But after the people died, they were able to analyse what was happening. And not in everybody, but in a significant number of them, they could see these brain responses. The brain waves were just the same in light unconsciousness, in deep unconsciousness, and really close to death as they'd been when the person was awake in terms of their response to those sounds. Now, for generations, the wise women have said to us, keep talking. Keep talking to your unconscious beloved person, because we see them look more relaxed when the right voices are in the room. We see them start to be a little bit restless when the wrong voice comes into the room. We know the music that they like, or the sacred scripture that they want to have chanted, or the prayers that they want to hear, or whatever is their tradition. And it's important for them that their brain is responding in a way that relaxes them by those sounds being present. So that's really interesting.
It's so comforting, I imagine, because we lose if it's such a gradual process, I imagine that's so difficult for the living, as I imagine everyone wants a moment. Like, how do I know then when I get the moment to say things, when I get the moment that where you lose control of the story that you wanted to tell?
Yeah.
It sounds like you can keep telling it.
You can keep telling it, but if you want the satisfaction of somebody eyeballing you and smiling back, why not do it, I don't know, today?
Sure, now.
That's good.
Nowish.
Yeah.
Nowish.
Because, if it's okay, you could do it again. As somebody wrote to me last week, and she said every year at the beginning of January, she writes love letters to every person who matters to her in her life. Every year.
What a great idea.
And she's recently had the most significant and difficult traumatic loss of somebody very, very dear to her. But she knows that that person knew how much they meant to her because they had 20-something years of love letters. So it can be too late to say I love you and thank you and I forgive you or I'm sorry, because those are the 4 last messages. But it can never be too early. But the other part of the brain that's still doing its thing is the bit that drives our breathing. So its technical name is the respiratory center.
Uh-huh.
And it lives just at the top of the spinal cord and the very bottom part of the brain back here. And in ordinary life, we don't really think about our breathing, except now I've said that, we're both thinking about our breathing. But we don't normally think about it, but we do manage it. Once we're unconscious, all of that stops and the brain just drives automatic, really primitive breathing cycles. And again, your dying guinea pig and your dying cat will do the same thing. So these cycles go from deep breaths, gradually getting shallower and shallower, and then back to the beginning again with the deep breaths. And because we can't feel the back of our throat by then, you know, that really sensitive bit where the drop of water touches it, your toast crumb, we'll cough and we'll splutter and we'll swallow because it's a reflex to protect our airway.
Yeah.
And now that's all switched off. We're not feeling our body in deep unconsciousness. So people sometimes in that deep phase of breathing will breathe out through their voice box, through their vocal cords, and it'll make a noise. Now, if you've never heard that noise before, you might think this person is groaning or trying to speak or trying to say something. And I can remember sitting beside my beloved Nana, wise woman who understood dying when she was dying. And half of my brain is noticing that she's doing this agonal breathing, it's a technical term. So the doctor me is noticing that, and the granddaughter me is going, "Are you all right, Nana? Are you trying to say something? Are you uncomfortable? Are you groaning?" And then I'm having to give myself a really good talking to. You know that this is automatic breathing. You know she's safe.
Yeah.
You know she's so unconscious that she's beyond discomfort now.
Yeah.
Just, you know, get a grip on yourself.
Is that what they call the death rattle? Is that what they say?
So the death rattle is a really interesting other noise. If there's a bit of saliva at the back of your throat, or we routinely use liquids to clean the mouth, keep it moist, keep it feeling fresh, little bits of that liquid can pool at the back of your throat, because if you're lying in that position, that's where gravity will leave it lying. So it might be a teaspoonful of fluid. It's not in the way. And we know it's not in the way because we can hear the air moving in and out of the lungs. But when air goes through fluid, it bubbles, right? So we hear this clicking, bubbling, weird, rattling noise, which is the death rattle.
I see.
And people say, "Oh, it's the death rattle."
It scares the crap out of people.
Yeah, because nobody's ever heard it before.
Yeah.
Because ordinarily, if somebody was so deeply unconscious that they weren't protecting their airway by swallowing or gagging or coughing, we would intubate them and send them to an intensive care unit to save their lives from whatever it was that had made them so unconscious. And here at the edge of life, when we know the person's dying, unless you're in the USA where everything is possible and therefore you'll be intubated and ventilated, the rest of us might say, okay, we're very close to the end of life now. And this tolerating this fluid here tells me that your beloved person is way beyond feeling discomfort from their body. They are not responding to that fluid in the back of their throat. So although it's a weird noise and it makes us in the room all want to clear our own throats, right? It's really strange. This noise is telling me that your mum, your dad, your friend is safe, is deeply unconscious, is doing ordinary, normal dying.
Ordinary, normal dying.
You know?
Oh man, we have every account of like trying to describe birth. Man, like those 2 million years birth classes. Like we have so much infrastructure around learning. Ordinary, boring birthing.
But we could learn from that, and we could midwife dying. So by the time somebody's so deeply unconscious that death rattle is starting to happen, you're usually fairly close to the last breath, you know, within hours or a day or so, rather than, you know, sometime in the next 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And people are frightened of what that's going to be like. So should we send the children out of the room now? Because the awful stuff's going to start to happen now, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, so what awful stuff are you expecting?
Yeah.
Well, so on soap operas, in cinema, death is always extraordinary because it's death as entertainment, isn't it? What actually happens is that during one of those phases of slow breathing, usually on the not always, there will be a breath out. It just isn't followed by another breath in. It's simple, it's gentle, it's not completely predictable, it's not what the family is expecting. And all of us who work regularly in palliative or end-of-life care have walked into a room where a person's dying and they've got all their beloved people around them, and everybody's waiting for the Hollywood moment. And you open the door, you look in, and you realise the person isn't breathing anymore, and nobody's noticed yet because it was so gentle that it wasn't obvious.
Yeah. I like how you do this really nice thing. You're so nice. You're like, hey, everyone. You were here. How do you say it? I don't know how to say congratulations, but you're so nice to people.
Well, so I learned a really lovely phrase from a community nurse, and I watched her. All of my bedside presence I've learned from nurses, and they are so graceful at this. But this community nurse said to this big family, there were people everywhere, and she just said, look at the gorgeous, loving space you've created around your mum. You're doing a great job. This is fantastic. And you could see people kind of preening a little bit. Oh, the nurse thinks we're doing really, really well. And the other thing that I learned from nurses is to go into the room and to comment on how well the patient looks. And it's unusual to comment on how well a dying person looks.
Yeah.
But actually to say, oh, so your mum looks really comfortable right now. How long she looked as comfortable as this? And you can see them going, wait, what? Oh, yeah, she does look comfortable. And what we're doing is drawing their attention away from their pain and their sorrow to the fact that even though we wish this wasn't happening, what is happening for mum is okay. And so they are starting to build their story. So it's making sure that people are noticing the good alongside the bad. And when we're sad and when we're anxious, we have mental filters, and we tend to see only the things that align with sad and anxious feelings. So we're trying to help people to look beyond that.
Widen the aperture.
And so put some of the good things into their story as well.
Honesty can relieve us from some pain or some bad storytelling. Lovely older couple that you met, where when you went in, she's the patient, she's not doing very well. He's the caregiver, he's not doing very well. Both of them are miserable. Tell me about that couple.
So that's Nellie and Joe, isn't it? And I was invited out to see this lady at home because she was so nauseous and vomity that she couldn't actually sit in the car to come and see me in my clinic at the hospice. And nausea and vomiting was my special research interest when I was a proper doctor in the olden days. And I was invited into the house by Joe, who took me with his finger on his lips into the front downstairs parlour, which was so beautifully tidy, not a patient in sight, to swear me to silence, that Nellie didn't know what was wrong with her. It would kill her if I told her, and I absolutely mustn't let her know that she had cancer. So that's a bit awkward.
Ethically complicated.
Okay. And it's a situation that we meet lots.
Yeah.
Because it's always based in love. It's always based in kindness and concern. It's not like, I want the power, don't tell her.
Yeah.
It's, please help me to protect her, don't tell her. So I struck a bargain with him. Said, look, I can't tell her a lie. But why don't you come with me so that you can hear the conversation? And if she asks me, I'll answer her questions and you'll be there to look after her.
That's nice.
And, if she doesn't, I'm not going to force anything on her that she doesn't want to know. Okay, so he still wasn't terribly sure, but he took me up the stairs, and there's Nellie sitting in her bed, this gorgeous white-haired elderly lady with a great big swollen tummy like a beach ball. And Nellie just says to him, have you given the doctor a cup of tea? And he looks really askance, and she, with no
Which
no
is
doubt
insane.
who's in charge in this house.
I cannot wait for you to leave this room, sir.
So she sends him down the steps to make a cup of tea. And as soon as we can hear him going round the bend in the stairs, she says to me, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to tell him.
Oh,
I don't know how to tell him. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, tell him what? And she, well, I'm dying with cancer and I don't think he knows.
oh.
So now I'm in this predicament, and I think, what am I going to do now? And just as I'm trying to work out what to do, Joe appears at the door. He's got this tray, teapot, teaspoons, china cups. So he puts that on the perching stool, and I see Nellie look at this tray, and she says, where are the biscuits? Go and get the doctor some biscuits. So he gets dispatched again. So he's creaking his arthritic way down the stairs and back into the kitchen, which gives us a bit of time, right? And I think, well, this is a couple who've known each other for a long time. They'll have resources as a couple. This won't be the first storm they've weathered. Maybe they always do things separately. I don't know. So I said to her, tell me about how you deal with difficult things as a couple. What's the most difficult thing you've ever dealt with? And she then looked out of the window to the pit head, when the pit has closed by now, the coal mine. And she told me there'd been an explosion down the mine and their son had been killed.
Oh.
And she didn't know how they'd got through it. And it was only by leaning in, looking after each other, working together as a team. So she's all teary-eyed when he arrives with the biscuits. Yeah. Looks at her, looks at me. I can see him going bright red. I thought, this is it. He's going to throw me out the window. Are you upsetting my wife? And then she says, no, Joe, she's not upsetting me. Sit down. Listen. I'm dying. And he says, who told you? Who told you? And they told me at the hospital. And he said, well, I didn't know you knew. And she said, well, I didn't know that you knew. And I just thought, I'm never going to get a cup of tea out of this, am I? So they didn't need me. I can come back another day and do the nausea stuff. They actually needed to do that stuff, and they didn't need me as a spectator or as a mediator at that point. So I left them with the tea tray and went back downstairs. But it's helping people to just get back in touch with their resilience and their coping mechanisms that they've always used. And somehow when a person's dying, we seem to think we've got to treat them differently from how we treat them when they're still themselves but not dying. So he wouldn't have been trying to protect her. He couldn't protect her from the fact that their son had died, and they were in it together, and that's what got them through. So reminding them, oh yeah, we can do hard things, and this is how we do hard things.
One of the most common questions I hear or I get, even though I know that when I get it, I'm not equipped to I know other people are very good at these questions. Like, they'll say, how do you, especially for people who are very sick, who are parents of young kids, there's a lot of how do you make choices around end of life issues when all the choices are bad.
Yeah.
And you had this young mom, and who I really, really liked your problem solving with her, because some of it was as simple as like, oh, Lovey, those jeans they look awesome, and I can tell that you really want to still care about your body, and that is absolutely allowed. And also, they're seriously digging into your stomach. We need to not wear those pants anymore. I really liked the like letting people be, like, don't I still want to feel attractive? And you got to this like really constructive place with this mom about that helped her make a couple choices.
Every now and again in medicine, you realise that your patient and you have stepped over a line somewhere and you've become friends. And she was one of the people that happened to me with. And every time it happens, I go, right, I'm never doing that again. I'm just never doing that again. And the problem is you can't decide that it's not going to happen because you discover that it has happened and it's too late.
You're like, oh crap, I love you.
Bronnie came for a pain consult to the clinic, and she was beautiful, little bit younger than me, could have been my very, very beautiful younger sister, that kind of feel in the dynamic, with the highest heels, the tightest trousers. So she did look absolutely lovely. And her pain was because she had a pelvis full of tumour.
Oh.
And the tumour was pressing on the nerves that come round your bottom and down your legs.
Yeah.
And I needed to be able to look at her tummy and examine her tummy. So she needed somehow to peel her way out of those trousers. And the reason they were so tight was that the tumour in her pelvis was starting to interfere with the blood return from her legs as well. So her legs had extra fluid trapped under the skin.
Yeah.
So you could see the lines of the seams of her jeans on the skin of her legs when she took those trousers off. You could see the zipper mark over the bottom of her tummy. And my concern was that the pain is because of pressure on the nerves. And of course, the trousers were almost like a suit of armour that were pressing on it even more. But she had a decision to make. Yeah. Maybe looser trousers would also be less pain in her legs. And she was so horrified at the idea of elasticated waist trousers, because that's letting your standards go.
Yeah.
And if I let my standards go, I've got nothing left. And suddenly you realise it's not about the trousers, stupid. It's about, there's something really deep under here about not losing control. And so this was really a kind of cognitive therapy first aid conversation. What is it about the idea of losing control that feels so difficult for you? And you just don't know where the person's going to go. Yeah. And she said, well, because it means I'm going to die. And of course, that's not the end of the conversation for us in palliative care. That's the beginning of the conversation. Okay, so what is it about the idea that you're going to die that is interfering with your mind so much? What is the awfulness underneath that? And I've asked that question, I think, probably to thousands of people, and always I'm blown away by the answer, because you never see where it's going. She had a sense that when I die, I'll be abandoning my children. And you almost think, well, that's got to be the worst thing. But I need to ask the next question, what is it about that idea? And she said, I've got this picture of them completely alone in the school playground, and they're crying. And I didn't know what to do with that. And she just sat and wept, and I'm filling up. And I could hear that that was awful, but I wasn't sure it was yet the bottom. So as I'm giving her tissues and saying, look, I can see that this really, really hurts, and I'm sorry that it hurts so much, but I want to understand so that I can support you. Is there something else underneath that? What's the worst part of that? And she said, there's nobody to tell my daughter about periods. Oh. And that was for her the epitome of,
I've left you without this, Mom.
I've left you motherless. And wow. So that was the bottom of her pit of despair. So we were able to do a really amazing piece of work of thinking about how important it was that she could think about her children being motherless, so that she could put the bereavement support materials together for them now that they would find comfort in after she died. And at that time in my career, throughout my career, in fact, I saw myself as somebody who's very comfortable at a deathbed. Put me to deathbed, I will sculpt the room, I will make sure that everybody's found their place and found their comfort zone. The minute that person has died, and now you're doing bereavement, I got nothing. I feel helpless, I feel hopeless, I don't know how to be, I don't know what to do with that. So where a lot of doctors feel like that about talking about dying, I'm great till the last breath. But after that, I entered this zone of all these people have is pain, and I have nothing to offer that can assuage that pain. So I have avoided, and certainly at that time in my career had managed successfully to avoid, people doing bereavement preparatory work.
And it sounds like one of the differences, one has a concrete ending and then the other doesn't. That grief can kind of just
you carry
on.
it, don't you?
Yes.
There isn't a way round it.
Yeah.
And when you start to go through it, you realise that you're going to be going through it forever now. There won't ever be a day when that person isn't missing anymore. So Ronnie said to me, look, doing that bereavement work, you know, I've got all the photographs of the kids and I know where they were and what they were doing, and I know I need to put labels on them all. It's going to make me so miserable to do that. I know what I'll do. I'll bring the biscuit tin that's full of photographs here with me, and we can do my cognitive therapy and pain and stuff, and then we'll use the other half of my appointment for you to support me while I do the bereavement preparation work. And it was the most difficult piece of work I have ever had to do. But I'm glad that I did it, and I'm glad that she trusted me to do it. So she was able to engineer her way through that by saying, these really difficult thoughts are true. My children will not have me as they're growing up. I am going to die. They will be bereaved. Is that thought helpful, or is that thought not helpful? And the answer is it's both.
Yeah.
So that thought is helpful while it helps me to do the preparatory work for them.
Yeah.
That thought is really unhelpful if I'm trying to do mummy cuddle time or bath time, or, you know, talking about how did you get on at school today time. That's an intrusive thought that just distorts and undermines my joy in the moment with you. So she learned a trick, which was to postpone the unpleasant thoughts. So when it came tapping on her shoulder, she'd be able to say, yeah, I know you're there, and I know it's true, and I know I need to deal with you, but this is not your time right now.
Wait your turn.
Yeah, it's not your turn. And so she had a worry book. This is another really great technique. So every time her thought monster gave her another thing to worry about, instead of worrying about it, because worry is our way of making sure we don't forget to deal with something.
Yeah.
So it keeps turning up.
Yeah.
If you get a little worry book, you just write it down and say, okay, gotcha, thanks, bye. You can go now, because I've captured it. And next time I have worry time, which is my appointment with myself once a week to sit down and look at my list of things that I mustn't forget to worry about. Sometimes when you look at the list, you can see 3 of them that actually I must have been having a really bad day that day, because they are just not worth worrying about. I could just cross those ones right out. And that still leaves me with a few. So which couple shall I tackle today?
Yeah.
And so it moves us from being at the mercy of our difficult thoughts to being the person who's choosing when and how to think about those difficult thoughts.
Yeah. Kathryn, you've genuinely given me better language and more peace about some really difficult thoughts. And I know you do that for other people, but it is embarrassing how much I like you. It's lovely. It's lovely what you do. And thank you so much for having this conversation with me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I've loved meeting you.